I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Bunwarang people of the Great Kulin Nation as the traditional owners and custodians of the land from which I'm zooming, and I want to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, both on this land and on the lands where you find yourself. I'm Hinde Ena Burstin, Hinde Burstin, Dijke Leshande from Down Under. And I want to start by saying a shaynem dank to the fabulous Farbindungen committee for yet another brilliant conference. You're amazing. I love the theme of bad Yiddish, which opened up the possibility for me of speaking more intimately on the topic, I Want Her So Bad, writing Yiddish Lesboerotica. And since this is an academic kind of conference, I'd like to say that I did a comprehensive literature review, discovered a dearth in queer Yiddish literary output, and set about writing some Yiddish Lesboerotica to fill the gap, so to speak. But the truth was much more visceral. The hole I was looking to fill wasn't a literary one. 32 years ago, I was living in a small Australian country town. Look at it, it's beautiful, Dalesford, about 80 miles from Melbourne. I had a great lesbian community there, but no one in the town spoke Yiddish. At that time, I felt split at the root, to use Adrian Rich's phrase. That split was evident in my writing. I wrote articles, poems, and lesboerotica in Yiddish, and eulogies and speeches for 19th of April and May Day in Yiddish. I was Yiddish and lesbian, but I had no place where I could be both. In 1993, after being granted a scholarship to take the Zuma program at Columbia University, I left my town of 1,000 people, including 2 Jews, and arrived in bustling, pulsating New York. Suddenly, for the first time in my life, I was meeting Jewish lesbians and Yiddish-speaking queers. I learnt the word lesbianke. I made up the word daikele. I marched with Das Freiliche Volk and danced wildly at klezmatics concerts. I was 30 years old, and I can tell you, my hormones were in overdrive. And as I took in the unfamiliar aromas of this huge city and of the gorgeous women there, the poem Ich will sein a Tourist came to me. At that time, I had never read any Yiddish Lesboerotica, so I spoke from the body. I'll now read you an abridged version in Yiddish only due to the time constraints, and my translations will be shown on the screen. But first, I want to mention that in the published version, which I've shown you on the screen, but you can, oh no, you just look on the screen. I've indented where it's something happening internally and something external is towards the margin, but I wasn't able to keep that in the PowerPoint slide because I wanted to include both the Yiddish and the English. So here we are, Ich will sein a Tourist. Du fragst mich, wo ich will herumreisen. Ich guck an deine spielhaftige Augen und tracht, ich will sein a Tourist von dein Körper. Ich will sich bekennen mit jedem fremden Winkel, sich orientieren in unbekannte Körperknätschen, schmecken dein fremden Reich wie dem fremden Reich von ein unbekannter Stadt. Versuchen dein saftigen, salzigen Tarm. Ich guck dich nicht in Panama rein, nur entfernt. Ich will reisen dahin und her, mit. Du fragst mich, wo ich will sich eine längere Zeit abstellen. Ich tracht wegen deiner feuchten Lippen, dein schwarz gekreiselte Haar, dein stolzen Hals, deine schwere, dicke Hand, deine feste, volle Brusten, dein weichen Bauch, deine lange Fies und dein mysteriöse Vulve. Ich guck dich Verborgenheit an und entfern. Ich bin nicht ungeduldig, ich will sich et abstellen. Du fragst mich für was, wenn ich aber so lieb zu reisen, bleib ich da stehen. Ich tracht wegen dein Privatkeit, wie ein Heil, was halt alles soll das behalten. Ich hör, wie dein melodische Stimme reizt und zerheizt mich mit zwei teitschige Ausdrücken. Ich damon sich, als ich weiß nicht, deine Gefühlen wegen mir. Ich will sein ein Tourist von deinem Körper, aber ich weiß nicht, ob du willst reisen mit mir. Du bist mit deinen Gefühlen also behalten. Behalte ich euch meine Gefühlen und ich einfach, ich weiß nicht, sie ich will bekommen. Avise. What strikes me about this poem, reading it again so many years later, is the underlying issue of consent and the importance of a visa. These are timely issues today. A short while after I wrote Ich will sein ein Tourist, I wrote a second poem, Ach mein Begelbäckerke, which I'm not going to read today because I think we don't have time. I've got it on my slide just in case, but you can probably access it, a recording of me reading it online, so help yourselves. So, as a Yiddish-speaking Daikale, I had been seeking a usable past. I wanted poetry that captured our struggles against prejudice, oppression, and discrimination. My poem Miriam's Lied is an attempt to create or recapture a Yiddish lesbian or queer lineage of love and resistance. I set this poem in biblical times, so I chose a desert sviva and a traditional rhyming scheme, but I was stuck for an ending for the poem. I considered ending the poem abruptly, mid-sentence, implying that the speaker had been captured and killed. At that time, many lesbian stories, poems, and films were bleak and typically ended in tragedy, so it would have fit right in, and it could have been a powerful way to show the impact of oppression. But I wanted something positive and rousing to match other aspects of my lineage. Thankfully, inspiration came to me, and I was able to end the poem with a message of strength, defiance, and hope. Messages we still need today. And here's Miriam's Lied. Oh Miriam, mein Malke von Midberg, an dir ist mein Herz voll mit Pein. Treff mich vor Nacht bei dem Brunnen, weiß schon, wo ich will behalten sein. Selbst man soll dich nicht noch gehen, chob meure, weil's trotter Gefahr. Sie sagen, es ist nicht normal, unser Liebe. Sie kennen uns Teiten der Fahr. Noch ich hunger, dich zu halten und halten, mit Liebe dein Leib zu mir drücken, mit Weichkeit dich wieder zu wiegen, zusammen dem Sonnenvergang anzugucken. Wenn du bist das Sichere in meine Orems, will mir sich zerflammen, wie Skeroid. Ich will dir lecken das Samt von die Wies. Ich will dir lecken das Salz von der Haut. Unser Liebe brennt heißer wie der Midberg, sprit wie Samt, was der Sett nicht kein Schotten. Haben gepaskend die, welche haben keine Ahnung, als sie unser Liebe verboten. Sie sagen, dass zwei Freuen Tore nicht lieben. Gallig, seien die Gesetze neus geklärte. Wenn noch es treffen sich unsere Lippen, weiß der Himmel, als du bist, mein Bescherte. Ich bin grad vor jeder Sekunde, weil meine Oasis, mein Teive bist du. Bis voll wieder in deine schwarze Augen sinken, versink ich in, tiefer, Ruhe. Gib Achtung, hielt sich mein Honig, schusch, dass ich zu mir geschwind. Selbst man soll dich nicht chappen, es ist doch unser Liebe, kein Sind. Oh Miriam, mein Malke von Midberg, als wir schon ankommen, wird mir sein besser. Ja, groß ist Tage, die Sakone. No, es ist doch unser Liebe noch größer. So that's Miriam's lead. So transgressing borders and boundaries are significant motifs in these poems and their publication. This theme assumes new urgency today. I hadn't intended to publish these poems, as the conservatism, moralism, and heteronormativity of Yiddish publishing in the 1990s precluded inclusion of these works in Yiddish publications. But then Irena Klepfish asked me to submit the poems to Bridges, Jewish feminist journal, where she was the Yiddish editor at the time. And I loved the journal, so I agreed. The only problem was I had to include translations. And this was a dilemma for me because depicting lesbian sex in Yiddish viscerally resists the myth of Yiddish as dead or dying, with Yiddish very much alive on the tongues of hungry lovers. Translation stills the tongues. But I gave in. My poems and translations appeared in Volume 5, summer issue of Bridges in 1995. The poems were really well received, way better than I expected, to be honest. A great review in Dalbay almost got me fired from the elementary Yiddish school in Melbourne, where I was teaching at the time. I don't have time to go into that story, but it's on the Yiddish Book Centre's website if you want to have it on their Wexler Oral History. And if you want to have a listen to it, it's a funny story about writing Lesboerotica and then becoming an elementary school teacher. So it did remind me that Yiddish can permeate all borders. Since then, I've often read these poems to non-Yiddish speaking audiences at queer lit or spoken word events, where the reception is always enthusiastic and I always get asked to come back. Miriam's lead has also been republished in several essays and will be included in Kadima's show Liebe Blied this year. I suspect the Bagelbacker and Tourist need to wait for the sequel, Liebe Bried. But the best lesbo-erotic Yiddish poem I have written remains unpublished and largely unknown, as I haven't been able to translate it in a way that captures the sexy sounds while maintaining the meaning of the original, despite countless efforts. And I think mainstream Yiddish publications that don't require translations still aren't open to erotica, especially not queer erotica. After all, reception has not always been positive, even for relatively tame poems like Miriam's Lied. After an ultra-Orthodox Jew stabbed 6 marchers, one fatally, at Jerusalem Pride March in 2015, I read Miriam's Lied as a response at a Shabbos Tish in Paris. When I finished, the room was silent. The glares spoke volumes. Some leaders in the community froze me out. It was painful and disheartening. Hopefully, the community has moved beyond silencing. But in these frightening times, I fear that poems like these, sexy and secular, will become ever more silenced and suppressed, if we let them. Sex writing is a radical act of resistance and defiance. It bears it all, challenging normalized religious mores of tznius and modesty, and casting off the shame that we are taught towards our bodies. Instead, sex writing celebrates the beauty, power, and desirability of all bodies. Queer Yiddish erotica refuses silencing and marginalisation of identity and desire on multiple levels. And for me, you can't tell on Zoom, but I'm disabled. So for me, there's an added joy that publicly reading my poems as a disabled poet disrupts the desexualisation of disabled people. I'm really honoured and pleased that my lesboerotic poems still have currency 30 years after they were first published. I guess sex never goes out of style, eh? For the past 30 years, I've been seeking out my forebears, the queer Yiddish poets who came before me. I've uncovered just a handful of lesbian Yiddish poems published in the early 20th century. The theme of resistance to suppression of the theme of resistance to suppression of queer desire is a common theme that links these poems to my poem, the lineage that I sought so long ago. And just as I look to the past, I look to the future too. I'm proud we are building a strong queer Yiddishist community and a diverse collection of queer Yiddish erotica. We live on the edge, but we live in dangerous times. We must withstand all efforts to squash, suppress, and silence our literature and our lives. For as Miriam's lover tells her in Miriam's Lied, Groß ist Tage die Sakone, nos ist doch unser Liebe noch größer. The danger is truly great, but our love is even greater. Ashein Dank.